Welcome to Continuing Human Education, hosted at Workflow. Before we get started, we want to acknowledge that we are on Comanche, Wichita, Kickapoo, Kiowa, and Osage lands. Today we have Chelsea Banks, and she is going to introduce our guest. Chelsea's going to be our moderator, and we're going to be discussing decentralizing power and control in favor of autonomy. I'm going to let you, okay, so Chelsea's going to introduce Cyndi Munson, who's our state rep. So.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Banks. Glad you're here. This is Cyndi Munson. She's our state representative for, will you give us some more clarity on exactly what that means?
I'm the state representative for House District 85 in Central and Northwest Oklahoma City. I guess I can share. I'm also the caucus chair for the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives and the leader-elect. So after the 2022 election, I will be the next minority leader for the House Democrats.
Perfect. Can you tell us a little, I mean, Cyndi, in our conversations kind of talking about how state government works and some things like that, there's so many little structures within this bigger structure. Can you break down some of those maybe state structures that we have around the Democratic minority leader process, and some of these other things?
Yeah, those, I guess some of those like titles can be sort of intimidating and confusing. Above all else, I'm the state representative for House District 85, so I'm elected by Republicans, Democrats, Independents, those who maybe don't care for either party and just really care about certain issues. And so, I spend a lot of my time talking to constituents and just trying to focus on their needs. But once we get into the Capitol, there are certainly power structures and different ways that we're organized in order to get the things done that we want done. And so since I'm a registered Democrat, I serve in the Democratic caucus. So there's Democrat and Republican. That's all we have in Oklahoma. Some states actually have multiple caucuses, which is basically groups that, align with each other, usually by party. And then within the caucus, I am on the leadership team, and I am currently the chair, which means it's a really fancy word for organizing meetings and making sure members have what they need. And then the leader position serves two purposes. One, the leader of the caucus, who's really in charge of sort of the political infrastructure of everyone, or of the caucus, and making sure that members are supported and our message is getting out to the state and to voters across Oklahoma. The second is, in the House of Representatives, you have a majority leader and a minority leader, and then you have the Speaker of the House. And so basically, I'm just, I guess you would say, the opposing, in this situation, the opposing person, just elevating our policy priorities and the things that we value and think are best for Oklahomans. And we're in the minority because there's less of us. I have had people actually reach out and say it's wrong to call you a minority just because you're Asian American. And I have to explain to people it's not minority based on that. It's just political parties. So,
though that is something that you are, that is something that's true for you.
True.
So there's a lot of layers there of what it means to be Cyndi Munson, state representative for House District, say it again.
House District 85.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
which is my birth year, so that's how.
A lot of layers.
Oh yeah. And to your point about being Asian American, I don't know if you're gonna ask me this, but I'm the first Asian American woman to be elected to the legislature, and so, even with that, just kind of speaking to the quote unquote minority piece is, not just political party, but my gender, my, nationality, my, how I look, things I believe in, my background. I mean, those are not always popular in the majority, especially right now in state politics. And so there are certainly different obstacles and challenges to overcome, and makes the job just a little bit different than how others may perform it.
Yeah. Okay. So something that has come up for us in conversation when we were kind of thinking about all of this was how, from the minority point of view, whether it's the Democratic Party or being Asian American or whatever that minority kind of piece is, one of the biggest things that we need to look at is how are we getting more people like us activated in the system, but then also how do we kind of tip the structure and tip the system in our favor? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. it's first really difficult. I mean, even for me, I was always interested in public service, but really couldn't see myself doing the work because there hasn't been anyone that's gone before me that looks like me, that has a similar background as me. And so that creates a barrier in itself, because if you can't see yourself doing it, you're less likely to pursue the opportunity. And a lot of self-doubt, and I think just doubt in the process, becomes really, really prevalent, because you feel like since you aren't of the majority, that what you have to say and what you value or what you believe in or what you could bring to the table really matters. And then in terms of our structure, in Oklahoma, because we have predominantly white men who are Republicans, they are going to recruit similar people who look like them. And that's even happened in the Democratic Party, where those who may be in charge of energizing or encouraging those to consider running for office or being involved in the process, it's not just about running. We have very few women and people of color who get involved in the financial aspect of politics. The necessary evil at this point in the world we're living in is that it does take money to run for office. You have things you have to pay for, and so often people feel like, especially women and people of color, those who have been disenfranchised or marginalized from the process, feel like they can't really contribute if they can't write a check for $1,000, or that they also may not have the time to get involved, to volunteer, or spend time away from their family and work to really get involved in the things that they care about. And also just voting. I mean, we really, really struggle in that area in our state, and I think it does contribute to what we're seeing now in state politics, but it trickles down to local, more local. I know you'll have some municipal leaders coming soon in this series that'll talk about that, but also at the national level, we see the dysfunction and the just seems to be a huge disconnect between what's actually happening in our daily lives versus what leaders in our state and country are talking about.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just dive right into this family piece,
Yeah.
if that's okay with you. So something that we had talked about was how some of those structures around the family dynamic, specifically since you mentioned being a woman, how those might change with your time that you have to commit, or your money that you have to commit, or whatever those pieces look like. What are some other family dynamics that impact our ability to create autonomy or empowerment within the individual?
Yeah, I think about this often in terms of how a person becomes empowered or feels empowered to get involved in the political process, because in order to be the person to go beyond just voting, but advocating for yourself and advocating for the issues you care about, you have to have some level of feeling or understanding or empowerment that someone's going to listen to me and they're going to take what I think and say seriously. And I have, I've knocked thousands of doors. I've talked to lots of different people across my district, but also across the state. And I'm always so curious as to why people feel like they shouldn't get involved at the most basic level, voting or contacting their state representative. And I think the root cause and where it comes from is family dynamics and dynamics in school. So typically children are taught sort of a democratic process or system, right, where they can vote on, once you get into junior high and high school, you're voting on class president, things like that. But even in your class, as a class, what is it that we want to do together? And students or children have an opportunity to vote. But when kids start talking about things that they care about, they know what's going on around the world. They have feelings and thoughts about those things. And what I've experienced, and I've worked in youth development, I should probably share that too. I've seen especially young girls who bring up the things that they care about, and they want to see the world change, and they want the world to be more accepting and caring and things like that. But when they go to adults specifically, or someone in power or authority over them, usually they hear, well, you're just a kid. You don't really know how things work. And once you get my age, you'll understand. Once it's time for you to vote, you'll see why. And I think we've probably all heard this phrase that when you're young, you're liberal, and as you get older, you become more conservative. I heard that all the time growing up. Hasn't changed for me quite yet. And I attribute a lot of while I do carry some self-doubt, my belief in doing this and why I've been so passionate and why I continue to go, even though it's really hard, my dad was in the military, and so I asked him lots of questions about what was going on around the world, that were going on in the news. Now talking about politics with him is a little more frustrating, but growing up, he always made space for questions and helped me to explore the things that I care about. And so I think what I see when I'm talking to people, trying to get their vote or trying to get them to get involved, or quite frankly, even those who do contact me, and when I don't give them the answer that they want, just sort of how they respond to that and how they treat me. I think it's very fascinating, but I do think it starts at home. I think that because we don't give children the empowerment or the autonomy to believe and think about the things that they care about, that translates into, it manifests itself later in life, that, you know, each of our communities grow from home to school, then the larger community, you know, your city or town that you're living in, then your state. So if you've always been shut down, how are you going to feel empowered as an adult? And then again, add on the layers of continued disenfranchisement, marginalization, and just society showing us, especially as women, that we don't matter, that what we care about just doesn't matter. And who is there advocating for us in places of power? So I know that was a lot, but
oh yeah, but that is the question, right? Like, who is there advocating for us in places of power? And you know, from my perspective, I look at you as an Asian American woman, and I'm like, oh man, there's Cyndi, the first person I've seen, especially in Oklahoma, that is leading this charge. And I'm grateful that I have you as that example, because as you just said, you did not have that example. So as we're able